tell you a fun fact that I learned today. So you know, like the pirate accent, like the R, matey, that one. So that's not an actual accent that pirates had. It was the guy who played the pirate in Treasure Island when they made a movie about it like decades ago. And he was from a place in England called Somerset, and he just like tweaked it to make it sound scary, and that's where you get the pirate accent from. Somerset.
Is there a Treasure Island that's not Muppets Treasure Island?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there is.
I thought so. I wasn't sure. Because I was like, I know that guy.
I love how your relationship with like so much popular media is the Muppets version of it.
I will say that's kind of a Phil thing. Because like Phil is very...
Is he the Muppet guy?
Phil was a Muppet. They were a Muppets family. Like I was too, but I did more like I watched Muppet Babies. Did you watch Muppet Babies?
No.
I only watched it for a couple years. I think it was on when I was very, very little, and I remember bits and it was like truly like a baby toddler kid show. So it was like I have like a very small memory of it.
Was it all of the Muppets as babies?
They were babies. Yep.
Oh,
it was so
like
cute.
Rugrats.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like, I watched it at the same time. It was on the same time Rugrats, but like I watched those at the same time. Yeah,
okay.
That was part of
I was into
lineup.
Rugrats.
Yep.
I liked Rugrats a lot.
I just watched Rugrats while Phil was out of town. I
really
rolled through and rewatched Rugrats. Yeah, there's 2 seasons on Netflix.
I loved the twins. Phil and Lil, was that there? Yeah, Phil and Lil.
Phil and Lil. Yeah, they were the best. They were like the gross ones.
Yeah.
Like ate worms and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved them.
Is that our banter? Is that our pre-show banter?
That can be our banter.
I love it.
It can be.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to I Scream, You Scream, your weekly scoop of the most chilling histories, mysteries, and true crime.
What are we talking about?
Okay. I'm Kathryn.
I'm Gina.
I do not have my notes open. I'm so sorry. Every week, we sit down and we talk about a story while we eat ice cream. We choose a new flavor every month, and this month's flavor is Orange Dream, and we are talking about dreams and nightmares. And I think this is our last official one. We'll have one more.
Yeah.
But we'll do a little something different, but we're still sticking with the dreams and nightmares next week, but this is our last official on the lineup proper story that we'll do.
Yeah. Next week is like the 5th Tuesday bonus episode.
Yeah. So cool. Grab a spoon. Let's dig in.
You did a great job.
Cheers.
That was so good.
I did not, but I do appreciate that. Kathryn's flustered today.
Does this episode come out on the 24th?
Oh, yeah, it does. Let's talk about winter holidays.
Happy holidays.
Non-denominational. Happy non-denominational Christmas Eve. Whatever you celebrate. So at this point, we will have celebrated the solstice.
Yeah. I hope you guys all had a really wonderful winter solstice. I hope we did too.
I hope we did too.
Mm-hmm.
Cinnamon wishes everyone a happy solstice as well. Are you doing anything for the holidays? I feel like I asked you that.
We don't have hard plans for actual Christmas. I think we're probably going to spend it with Tom's family. And then my family is coming to visit on, I think, the 27th. Yeah, and they'll be here for a week. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So that'll be fun.
Until then, do you have a story for us this week?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
But I
wanted to talk about something.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
I have a little ice cream man. What episode did we first talk about yours? It was a while ago, I know.
Like one of the first ones.
Okay.
Yeah, because I got it the day our first episode came out.
Oh, okay. So
for like a couple weeks
been a while ago.
Yeah. We've been talking about him the whole time. Yeah.
Well, yeah. If you haven't listened to whatever episode it is we're talking about, because we don't know.
I don't know.
Kathryn, a little while back, her wonderful niece and sister-in-law got her this little like melty ice cream guy with a skull on it. And for my
Yeah.
birthday, Catherine got me one. So she has a pink one, and I have like this beautiful turquoise one whose name is
Oh,
Malevolent Mustachio.
I do have to say, I did not get this for her. Our trusty mascot, Karen, got both of them for us. So, like, it's from me insofar as I mailed it to Gina, but this is another
Thank you,
Karen
Karen,
sponsor
and thank you,
post.
Catherine, and thank you, Coco.
And thank you, Coco. Yeah.
So before we get into the actual story, I want to give the biggest trigger warning to anyone listening. We're going to be dealing with some heavy subjects, particularly children who passed away. So if that's not something that you want to hear about, it's totally fine. You can skip this episode. We'll be back next week. I don't blame you because it is a tough one. But if you want to stick around, you're more than welcome to. Anyway, okay, so the year is 1966 in a small Welsh village called Aberfan. And Aberfan is in an area of Wales known as the Valleys, which refers to, like, you know, you guessed it, a ton of valleys, specifically river valleys. And Aberfan, in particular, is situated in a valley in South Wales known as Merthyr Vale. Over time, the valleys have become known as kind of key players in Welsh industrial history, specifically for coal mining. Wales was very, very big in coal exporting, and Aberfan was no different. Aberfan was a coal mining town, and it had been since the 1800s. It had been around for decades. And by the time this story starts in 1966, coal was the primary source of income for Aberfan's roughly 5,000 residents, which is a lot. But the fact that a ton of people in the community worked together didn't mean that it was all sunshines and rainbows. Over the decades, Aberfan had had a few really serious issues related to coal, not least of which are things like the health issues you suffer when you work at a coal mine, things like respiratory diseases, vision problems due to low levels of light, and also just like physical injuries that you get from working in a super dangerous environment. But another issue was that by 1966, they had accumulated a very significant amount of coal waste, which is called spoil. And spoil is basically made up of everything that's left over after you're done mining the coal. So it's things like a whole lot of dust and ash, and then also the ore that's left over after you're done extracting the coal from it. And to deal with that amount of waste, they basically just put it all into big piles called spoil tips. And spoil tips are not like little piles of waste here and there. They're huge. Like they could grow to be over 100 feet tall. They are
Whoa.
huge, massive piles of debris. Yeah, they're really, really
Ew.
big.
Wow.
And
Okay.
Aberfan's not the only place where these spoil tips existed. It was a completely normal, accepted, and recognized part of the coal mining process. Like the waste, it had to go somewhere, you know? And by 1966, Aberfan had 7 of these spoil tips, and 5 of them were placed on a huge hill right above the village. The people of Aberfan were very rightfully concerned about this because remember, like a ton of them worked in the coal mining industry, so they understood the dangers of having that much waste hovering overhead. They knew that it carried the risk of things like landslides, fire if a piece of active coal was still in it, and it's also just kind of a health hazard to have that much coal dust hanging around.
Yeah.
Not to mention, they had already, by 1966, had issues with these spoil tips in the past. In 1944, a part of one of the spoil tips had come loose and started to slide down the hill, and it wound up only stopping about 500 feet from the first row of houses. And if it had kept going, people would have died. It's extremely dangerous. Yeah. And because of issues like this, over the decades, the residents of Aberfan had filed complaint after complaint with the National Coal Board, the NCB, but time and time again, they were just kind of brushed off and told that everything was fine and the NCB wasn't going to do anything about it for a myriad of reasons, but mainly due to things like poor management and like unqualified people in leadership positions, which I think is something that all of us can relate to. Over time, the primary concern had become one specific spoil tip called spoil tip number 7. In 1963, it had actually shifted a little bit, which caused residents to start getting more concerned that if it kept on shifting, eventually it would lead to an avalanche of debris. But as always, when they raised it with the NCB, they said that it was insignificant and probably fine.
Oh, well, as long as
Hmm.
it's probably fine.
That's what I like to hear. Yeah.
Ugh, that's. Mm-mm.
Uh-huh. Cut to 3 years later, and tip number 7 was the only actively used spoil tip in the area and had reached a height of 111 feet with 297,000 cubic yards of waste. It was fucking massive.
Whoa.
Yeah, it
Was
was
there.
huge.
Is there a reason that was the only one being used? Like, were the others, like, full or.
I don't actually know.
Or
I'm
is
assuming
there
that the
no.
other ones had
Okay.
just grown to a size where they couldn't safely be used anymore,
Capped
but
it? Yeah.
I don't know that for a fact.
Okay. Okay.
But also, coal mining had been going on in Aberfan for, I think, just over a century at this point. So that, I mean, the amount of
Oh.
waste they had accumulated was very large. So
Yeah.
I would imagine that the other ones were just full, but I don't know.
Okay. I'm just like, I'm learning things about coal mining right now. So that's where, like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is interesting because it's so prevalent and happens all over the place. But I'm like, huh.
And it's
Wait.
interesting to go to a few years ago, my parents
Mhm.
came to visit me in the UK, and we went on a tour of like a coal mine in Wales, actually, that's no longer
Oh, cool.
used. And it was the period of time where it was in use was set a little bit before like the thing that we're talking about now. But you learn about the conditions that they had to work in and some of the
Mhm.
machinery that they had to use, and it was
Yeah.
grueling labor. It was
Yeah.
a rough job.
My father's going to be like, yes, you have. You were at a coal mine when you were 2.5 or something. But I don't think I've ever actively been to a coal mine, like coal specifically. We just went to a copper mine over the summer when we were in the UP, which I will be doing. I will be doing an episode on that sometime in the future. I'm like dying to
Oh,
talk about this copper mining town. But yeah, it's like that's always the thing that on all these tours and in all the like history about mining is just how like it's dangerous because you're in a man-made cave essentially, but like even on the tour I feel like you don't fully get how
yeah.
dangerous and uncomfortable and scary and
Mm-hmm. And
awful
how
the
young
experience
some of the people, like
is.
they were kids
Yeah.
working in there.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's a lot.
So it's around this time that in the early hours of October 21st, 1966, weeks of heavy rain had made tip number 7 even more unstable, causing part of it to shift by 10 feet. The morning shift workers did notice this and they reported it to their superiors, who responded with basically an order to just stop using that spoil tip for the day. But sadly, it was too little too late. At 9:15 a.m., a deafening sound echoed across Aberfan, described as sounding similar to a jet engine.
Ooh.
Yeah. Within minutes, an avalanche of 150,000 tons of slurry and debris plummeted down the hillside at over 20 miles per hour. And in the avalanche's path, right at the bottom of the hill, was a primary school called Pontglass Junior School. And for our American listeners out there, that's basically an equivalent of our elementary school. Its students, who numbered around 240, were just starting classes for the day when the avalanche struck the building. The school and 18 nearby homes were decimated, giving hundreds of students, teachers, staff, and civilians no time at all to run. Aberfan residents immediately rushed to the site, trying to dig out children, teachers, and other victims with their bare hands. But in some areas, the mixture was 30 feet deep, and it wasn't like digging in loose soil. The combination of coal waste, random debris, and water from the rain had made it kind of mud-like at first. But as soon as it
Ooh.
stopped moving, it very quickly solidified into something much more compact and very, very difficult to dig through. Despite this, they were able to rescue some survivors, but ultimately the incident left 144 people dead, including 116 children, most of whom were between the ages of 8 to 10 years old.
Oh my god.
It's fucking
That's
heartbreaking.
little.
It's so
That's so
sad.
sad. And that's like in a town of, what did you say?
Like 5,000 people. So
5,000? That's like a big
this
percentage.
incident wound up killing just about half of the village's youth, like the village's children.
Oh my
Just about
God.
half. Yeah. Yeah. It was awful.
Whoa.
Mhm. It destroyed a town, like emotionally, physically, in every way you can
Yeah.
imagine. It was absolutely devastating. A call almost immediately went out for help, and news very quickly began to spread on both a local and a national level. Within 24 hours, recovery teams, press, and legions of volunteers had descended on what was left of Aberfan, including a 42-year-old psychiatrist named John Barker. So, we're going to talk about John Barker for a little bit because he has an interesting past. And just for context about him, he was one among a family of psychiatrists. He had studied at Cambridge before becoming a doctor 18 years prior to the tragedy at Aberfan. And a fact about Barker that I think is really interesting is that when he was in college/university, his nickname was Small Print Barker because he paid attention to everything. He was a master of the details and he
Wow.
knew his shit. Yeah, he had like a reputation for that kind of thing.
That's
So
such a
he
like sorry to interrupt, but
No, you're
that's
fine.
such a like smart person nickname for that type of thing.
I wonder if he came up with it himself.
Oh my God, that
He
would be
doesn't
so
seem like
funny.
the kind of guy that would, but it does
Yeah.
sound like something that someone would want to be called.
That sounds like something like, I mean, if he's studying, when was he given this nickname?
Oh, it was like 1940s probably.
Okay. I mean, if he went to like Cambridge and all that, like he's surrounded by the type of people that would
That's
give
true.
someone a smart person nickname. Anyway,
I
sorry,
know,
please
yeah.
continue. I had to land on that because that's hilarious.
Okay, no, I knew that you would like that one. Good, good.
I love that. Yeah, that's great.
So Barker was, by all means, definitely a leader in his field, but he was also known to put extreme amounts of pressure on himself. Like he was the kind of person who would take his work home with him and obsess over every aspect of it, essentially to the point of having mental breakdowns. Like that's the amount of pressure that he put on himself. But even under like the considerable amount of self-induced emotional strain, he still managed to be just like this shining influence in the field of psychiatry. Just one example of this is at the hospital that he worked at, he was instrumental in improving the treatment of mental health patients. I can't say fucking words today.
That's
The
all right.
treatment of mental health patients, making their experience basically just more humane and less like kind of the sinister asylum stereotype that which was more common back then, really. And he also actually co-authored a paper which detailed systemic issues in mental health care culture at the time. And at one point, he was called on by the Ministry of Health itself to discuss what he found. So he was like a leader in his field. He was a big deal. But he also, just at his core, he seems like he was just a really good person who cared about people. And he always wanted to help, especially if it meant listening to someone when no one else would listen to them. That's the kind of person that he is. And when the tragedy in Aberfan happened, Barker was a member of the Society for Psychical Research, which is a British society of scientists, philosophers, and other kind of intellectual types who are dedicated, because this society still exists, they're dedicated to understanding events that others would describe as psychic or paranormal. So he was interested in that kind of thing. He had multiple run-ins with the paranormal throughout his life, but more than that, he was just kind of an open-minded dude, and he was genuinely curious about the bounds of the human experience. He has
cool.
I knew you would like that. And I have a quote that I think you're going to like even more because we talk about this kind of thing all the time. So he's quoted as saying once, "What is now unfamiliar tends to be inadmissible and is therefore just not accepted. Thus, for generations, the earth was traditionally regarded as flat." Yep.
I say this all the time.
You say this all the time.
I say this all the time.
He was one of those guys who was asking, what are we getting wrong now? What don't we understand that we think we do?
What don't we know yet? Yes.
Yep. That was him. That was Barker.
Oh my God. Yes. I love this guy. Big fan. Big fan.
Me too. And I think you're only going to
Yes.
like him more the more we talk about him.
Okay, good. I'm always a little nervous whenever we, like, myself included, whenever we, like, introduce names of, like, oh, this person's going to be a prominent.
I know.
I'm like, okay, do we like them, though?
Are they
I
evil?
need to know ahead of time before I start, like, rooting for them.
No,
Like,
you're totally,
yeah,
you should
no, I
root for
love
Barker.
this.
He's a
Okay,
really good
cool.
dude.
Yeah. No, I love that. I say that all the time. Like,
I read
what
that
don't
quote
we
and I was
know
like,
yet?
I have to read it on the podcast because Kathryn,
Cool.
yeah, 100%.
The flat earth thing in particular, we're going to ignore the discussions still being had about that. But yes, that's such a great example.
Yep.
This is, well, no, it's not an aside. I just saw, this is like a tweet that has been circulating for years about like the purpose of science is like the discovery of fact. And when science changes, it's not that you were lied to, it's that more was learned. So it is not like now we are operating with this new knowledge.
Yeah, you can't be good at this and be closed-minded at the same time. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that 100%.
Do you want to hear something else about Barker that I think you're really going to dig?
Of course. I'm like glowing right now. I love this. It's a very sad story. I don't love this story, but I love this person.
Yes, it is very sad. But Barker is kind of one of the
I'm like latching
the parts
on
of this
to
story
him.
that like you need to latch on to get through it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's why I'm having such an aggressive reaction because I'm like, I don't know this story, to be clear, but you have warned me about it. So I'm like, okay, this is good.
I mean, honestly, the hard part, or not the hard part, but like the most disturbing part is over. Like it will not get worse than 116 children dying, I promise.
Oh my God, thank God, because that's fucking bad.
Yeah, it's bad. It's very bad.
I've just been bracing myself.
No,
for
you're fine.
Story, so I'm like really aggressively, like my emotions are swinging all over the place.
So when Barker went to Aberfan, at that time he was working on a book about what happens when someone has a premonition of their own death. And whether or not foreseeing your own death can cause you to become so afraid that you literally die and make your prediction come true. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's a phenomenon known as psychic death, which is metal as fuck.
Stop it right now.
I know.
Does this book exist?
He did finish it. It was published, 1968, I think.
Oh my God, am I like a huge fan of this? Is like, do I have a favorite psychologist?
I think we might.
I think I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's another thing I talk about all the time is people get, not psychic death. I don't talk about that all the time. I didn't know that was a thing. But like basically a self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially, that would be a version of that. I talk about that shit all the time because that is like a known thing is like if you're very anxious about something happening, it is more likely to happen. Because you're so anxious about it. Like if you're anxious about tripping and falling in front of people when you're on stage, you're more likely to trip and fall because you're not calm or confident, you know?
I'm smiling because what you are describing is a substantial part of this story. Okay, so we don't know exactly why Barker chose to go to Aberfan. It is possible that he heard rumors about residents foreseeing the events that happened and he wanted to talk to them for his book. It's also possible that he was just curious. A lot of people did go just to see what was going on, or he could have just been a good person who wanted to help recovery efforts. We're not sure. Regardless, he arrived the day after the avalanche, and when he got there, volunteers and local miners were still just frantically digging at the pile of waste looking for survivors. And Barker spent hours talking to the people of Aberfan, and while he was having these conversations with them about what they'd been through, he heard several very unusual stories. By this point, the grieving residents had started to talk about, how did this happen? Why did it happen? Was there any sign? Could we have done anything to prevent it? All very normal but very unfortunate thoughts to have in a situation like this. And some of the things that they were saying really caught Barker's attention, to say the least. Someone mentioned that the night before the tragedy, an 8-year-old boy named Paul had drawn a large group of figures standing on a hillside digging at the soil with the words, "The End," written above it.
Whoa.
Paul would later die in the school.
I literally just got full body chills.
Someone else said that a girl named Errol had recently, and seemingly out of the blue, told her mother that she wasn't afraid to die. This was particularly out of the ordinary for Errol because apparently she was not given to like flights of fancy. She was a very no-nonsense kid. And Errol's parents would later on sign an account of this, which states, and I'm going to read for you like what the little girl talked to her mom about. So the day before the disaster, she said to her mother, "Mummy, let me tell you about my dream last night." Her mother answered gently, "Darling, I have no time. Tell me again later." The child replied, "No, Mummy, you must listen. I dreamt that I went to school, and there was no school there. Something black had come down all over it." Errol would later die in the school as well. Now, for the skeptics in the room, I do have to say that these are anecdotal and after the fact and are also based on human recollection rather than cold hard facts. I'm not saying they're not true, but I know some people are skeptical about that kind of thing, so I have to say it. But it was enough to spark an idea in Barker's mind. He started to wonder, had anyone else received some kind of premonition about what would happen in Aberfan? This idea just kind of tugged at him because remember, he's kind of obsessive about the things that he cares about and works on. So much so that he wound up going to speak to the science correspondent of the Evening Standard. He was a guy named Peter Fairley. And Fairley had been helping Barker with parts of his book. They had worked together in a professional capacity before, so they were just kind of like buddies. And Fairley agreed to put a request from Barker in his column in the Evening Standard, basically asking if anyone else had had a premonition of what was to come in Aberfan. At the time, the Evening Standard had a circulation of around 600,000 people-ish, and Barker received 76 replies to his request. Many of them involving dreams, which I'm going to tell you a few of. A man from Lincolnshire said that 2 nights before the disaster, he dreamed he was trying to buy a book from a machine, and on the screen was a word he hadn't seen before: Aberfan. A woman said that the day before the events in Aberfan, she had told 6 witnesses that she had had a vision of a schoolhouse, a Welsh miner, and, quote, an avalanche of coal hurtling down a mountainside. Minutes after the disaster struck, before anyone outside of Aberfan could realistically know what happened, there are reports that a film technician jumped up from her chair at work, complaining of an earthy smell that reminded her of death. Barker wound up responding to a ton of these participants, and through his conversations with them, he became convinced that precognition was not only real, but not that uncommon. He speculated that being able to see the future was as common as being left-handed, which is interesting. I think that's a cool comparison. So interesting. Right?
I think it's a cool comparison because I feel like that's a two-way comparison because being left-handed is surprisingly rare, actually. But
everyone knows a left-handed person on the, you know what I mean?
Because precognition could be surprisingly not rare relative to the way we think about it, which is like the opposite of left-handedness. Right. Okay, they're meeting in the middle.
You're right. Yeah.
That's like a really I love that. I love
it's a great comparison.
It's such a great comparison. Yeah, that's a great comparison. I love it.
He's very good at what he does. And the quality of... Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, is this Dr. Barker my Tony Thorne? I think he might
be. Tony! God. I miss Tony. Wonder what he's doing.
On our Instagram, we got a picture of him. You can.
I wonder if we can pay him to listen to this podcast. We might not even have to pay him.
What would that be? Like a reverse sponsor? Like our podcast sponsors him.
Yes. This whole podcast is for Tony Thorne.
Yes. And now I already forgot his first name. Dr. Barker.
John. His name is John. John Barker. Okay. J.C. Barker. Yep.
JCB.
Hey, that's almost your mom's initials, JB.
I almost said that, but I didn't. Yeah, she's a JFB.
So the quality of information that Barker was getting from these participants was so useful to him that he decided that he wanted to broaden this out even further and start collecting a wider net of information. So at the time, Fairley, which his buddy at the Evening Standard, Fairley was making regular appearances as a science commentator on British television. And somehow he was able to hook Barker and his participants up with like a televised appearance. On December 2nd, 1966, so the same year of the events in Aberfan, Fairley, Barker, and a number of the people who had responded to them were scheduled to appear on a live show called The Frost Program to discuss their findings. They waited backstage and waited to be called out, but the show just kind of kept like going and going, and they just weren't getting called up. And then it was over, and the call to appear on the show had never come. Allegedly, what happened was that the host, Frost, had peeked into the green room unseen before the show, like kind of like, like dipped his head in without anyone noticing. And based on how that group of people looked, he decided he didn't want to have them on the show.
Sorry, what?
Yeah. Barker was fucking pissed. Fairley was a little bit more forgiving. So Fairley's rationale for why Frost did this was basically, well, if something happens and then everyone said that they knew it was going to happen after the fact, it doesn't mean much. It's not like a scientific discovery because anyone can say that they knew something was going to happen. But any anger that Barker felt over this only made him want to work even harder to prove them wrong. So together, he and Fairley convinced the editor of the Evening Standard to open what they called the Premonitions Bureau.
What is that?
I'll tell you. So fancy names aside, the Bureau was designed so that readers could send in their dreams and premonitions to the Evening Standard and then have them compared with actual events. And the plan was, if after a year the program was successful at predicting the future, Barker would present their findings to Parliament. So that's pretty fucking cool. It officially started on January 4th, 1967, and it used an 11-point scoring system for predictions. You got 5 points for accuracy, 5 points for unusualness, and 1 point for timing.
Holy crap, this is bonkers.
Yeah. It's like a scientific approach to telling the future. It's really interesting. So in Barker's eyes, the predictions that he had collected about Aberfan had already proven that precognition exists. So he wanted to use the Bureau as a way to harness that ability to prevent more tragedies from occurring. His ultimate goal here was to somehow like find a way to computerize these visions to the point where we could detect patterns in predictions that might be helpful for deducing the date, time, or type of disaster that was going to happen, basically forming an early warning system that can tell the future. So cool.
Wait, that's so much fun.
I know, right? Yeah. An obvious issue with this, though, is that if you accurately predict something and then prevent it from happening, everyone will just say your prediction was wrong, which means there was ample criticism of the Bureau. There was a lot of room for suspicion in experiments like this. But even that did not stop Barker from trying. He didn't really care about the skeptics. He has a quote about this that I think it's another one that just encapsulates his approach to life and his work. And the quote is, "If only one major catastrophe could be shown to have been prevented by this means, the project would have more than justified itself, perhaps for all time." So, like, he was not a guy who was out to save the world. He was out to save anybody that he could. And in the spring of 1967, just a few months after it was created, the Bureau had its first big and correct prediction. It came from a guy named Alan Hensher, one of the people who had reportedly predicted Aberfan. And Alan gave Barker a call and predicted that a plane full of people was going to crash over some mountains. And he said that either 123 or 124 people would die from the incident. 1 month later, a passenger aircraft crashed in the hills of Cyprus. And when the Evening Standard reported on the event, the headline was 124 die in airliner.
Wow.
He nailed it. The month after that, another of the Aberfan seers, a woman named Kathleen Middleton, reached out to Barker to predict what she described as an astronaut petrified, terrified, and just frightened. The next day, Vladimir Komarov, a Soviet cosmonaut, died when he attempted to return to Earth.
What?
Yeah. Later that year, both Alan and Kathleen both correctly predicted a railway crash in England that wound up killing 49 people. Like, these fuckers can see the future, man. They're predicting shit that is coming true. Now, admittedly, like, the Bureau did collect a lot of predictions. These are just a few of them. And if you predict enough things, some of them are going to come true. Like, it's just probability. People debated that then, and they do now. It just is what it is. But for Barker, these predictions were about to get way more personal. Early in 1967, Barker received a call from Alan, the one who predicted the plane crash.
Okay.
And Alan sounded panicked over the phone. Alan said that he had been worrying about Barker all day, and he begged him to go check the gas supply at his house. And when Barker explained that he didn't have a gas supply at his address, Alan paused and then asked Barker if he had a dark car. When Barker confirmed that he did, actually, it was a dark green car, Alan said, "Be very careful." Now, Barker was a little bit taken aback because that's just a weird thing to say to someone. So he asked Alan if he believes that his life was in danger. And Alan said yes. But like I hinted at earlier, not all of the predictions that the Bureau collected were correct. The month after Kathleen predicted the cosmonaut's death, Alan predicted that an airplane would experience some kind of disaster and that there would be children involved in it somehow. And this prediction that more children were going to die because of a tragedy kind of exacerbated this internal crisis that Barker had been having for a long time, which is basically when you know something bad is about to happen, how can you stop it from happening? Barker was so worried about this that he actually wound up reaching out to Fairley about the prediction. And I'm going to read you a quote from the conversation that he had with Fairley. "What if Mr. Hencher is right again? How can we stop it? If we could, then Mr. Hencher would not be warned of this possible terrible tragedy in the way that he was. If only we could get more information. If only we had more details. If only." Like, he was desperate to do anything he could to stop something like this from happening again. Luckily, that prediction doesn't seem to have materialized. But again, we return to the question, as does Barker, how useful is knowledge of a future tragedy? Are we powerless to stop it? And do the visions mean that it's already too late? And all of this is kind of percolating in Barker's mind at the same time that he's facing predictions of his own death. So he's kind of going through it. He has a lot on his plate. He's stressed out to the max.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Bureau's year of operation was starting to close. And it wasn't like it was going to stop operating after a year. It was just like at the 1 year point, they were going to decide whether or not this was successful and whether or not their findings were ready to present. And over the course of 1967, more and more newspapers had started picking up on the Bureau's results. But any satisfaction that Barker was feeling was, of course, underpinned by this constant tugging fear over his own death. Alan called Barker again in 1968 to reiterate that he still believed Barker's life was in danger. Meanwhile, correct predictions continued to come in. In March 1968, Kathleen reached out to the Bureau with concerns about a potential assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy. She reached out to the Bureau multiple times in the months that followed to reiterate her premonition, and that kind of crescendoed until June 4th when she called the Bureau 4 times in a single day. Kennedy was assassinated shortly after midnight.
What the F?
Yep, right?
See, I'm like, here's the thing. Wait, I don't think I ever told you this, but what if no, it's not that deep. Sorry.
I was like, have you seen an assassination?
No.
What?
No. Oh my God, no. I think that I would be able to keep that to myself. Are you kidding? I would immediately oh my God, Gina, guess what I just saw? So it's not that exciting. I actually hate it, and I'm gonna undo it this year. So
Okay.
it didn't really work that well, but it worked a little bit. and I'll elaborate in a second. But one of my resolutions this year, I don't really do New Year's resolutions. We can talk about that more next week, but I do like a mid-year resolution with myself. Like I'll check in and be like, how are things going? What's weird? Like what should we change? So this year, one of my mid-year resolutions was to be more skeptical because I was getting to the point where I was like, okay, bitch, now you're just being like gullible. Like you're just believing in every conspiracy theory that anyone will come up with. And that's like mentally unhealthy. So there are a lot of things I would like, okay, what else could this be? Blah, blah, blah. So like I'm listening to the story and my knee-jerk reaction is like, okay, was she part of it? Was she like, did she literally like
Was she the
murder this guy?
assassin?
Was she part of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like stuff like that. But I'm also like, okay, I don't know anything about statistics, but like what are the odds that someone could like guess? Like, do these odds match like what percentage of people might like guess things correctly? Or like, am I steamrolling something?
You're asking, no, you're not steamrolling anything, but you are asking the right questions.
Well, okay. Well, one of the things I was thinking of was, so Phil's friends are all like, well, I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of Phil's friends are really into like gambling. Like they'll be like watching a game and they'll be like, oh, $50 says, number 5 goes up for a 3-point shot at the 2-minute mark. Like just bizarre, like the most random things. So we were having a game night with them. They started talking about like stats or something. I don't remember what I said, but I inserted myself into the conversation as I do whenever I can. And so I don't know, like, we're doing like fake gambling, like the type of gambling you do with kids who want to be involved. Is basically what was happening with me. So he was like, I'm thinking of a number, between 0 and like 9 or what, like 1 to 10, 0, whatever it is. And I guessed it right on the first guess. And you would have thought that he saw a magician pull a rabbit out of the hat. He was so like, oh my God, like you only have a 10% chance of getting there. He was floored. And I'm sitting there like, hey, I'm psychic, first and foremost. But secondly, like that doesn't seem 10%. Yeah, that's a low percentage. If a doctor came in a room and was like, you have a 10% chance of living, I'd be like, wow, that's low. But in terms of like a number guessing game, we're all sitting around drinking and I just like off the cuff, like, I don't think that's, I don't think that's like a very low percentage. But then he was like, okay, I have another number, like guess again. And I was only 1 away, which also floored him. But, and this is where like I am trying to be skeptical, I chose either 7 or 8 and his choice was the other one. But the only reason I did that was because logically, okay, the previous number was 2. He's going to try to get as far away from 2 as possible.
But you don't want to go all the way to 10 because that's obvious.
But you don't want to go all the way to 10 because that's obvious. So where can we land in the 3 seconds I have to choose a number? Okay, let's hit 7 or whatever. You know what I mean? So I'm like, did I feel superior and am now like have bragging rights and am able to say, see, told you
I think you do have bragging rights.
But at the same time, there was a thought process. Like the chances were good that I was going to get it both times based on logical thought, That's where I'm like trying to be for these stories, but I'm also like, yo, they were totally predicting the future for sure.
So fun fact about Kathleen, she was born in Massachusetts. And and her parents moved to the UK during the Great Depression, but she was not like, because you would think like, oh, if she knew about the assassination, maybe she was involved in low-level politics in some way and like heard something was going to be happening or like saw that he was getting targeted in the media or something like that. No, she was a piano teacher in her mid-50s.
Okay, so not a lot of cause for murdering a politician.
Not a whole lot of cause for assassinating anybody, no. Soon after she correctly predicted the assassination, Kathleen revealed that she, just like Alan, had also had visions of Barker's death. Mm-hmm. So, just to like summarize, 18 months after the Bureau's inception, 2 of its most successful participants had both independently predicted Barker's death, which is like the cruelest irony, given that he
Yeah.
just published a book about what happens when you're convinced you're about to die.
Oh my God, I
You know what I
totally
mean?
forgot
Like,
about that part.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Mm-hmm.
God.
Yeah. 2 months after Kathleen's warning, in August 1968, she reports that she suddenly woke up in the early hours of the morning, gasping and calling for help. Meanwhile, Barker, at home, suddenly died at 44 years old.
Stop.
It gets even more interesting.
Okay.
What killed him seems to be a point of contention.
Okay.
Some sources say it was an embolism. Some sources say it was a brain hemorrhage. And these aren't like random forums on the internet. These are like The Guardian reports one thing, the New Yorker reports another thing, Wikipedia says something else. Like that, none of them can completely agree what happened, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
If it was something like a brain hemorrhage, those aren't like insanely uncommon for people who are under a lot of stress. And like I mentioned earlier, this was a man who was constantly putting stress on himself for everything. So it might have had a component of self-fulfilling prophecy here.
Yeah.
Because he was so stressed about his own death.
My mind's doing a lot of things right now. Give me a second. Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy if other people were the ones that said, hey, you're going to die?
I think it's more so just if you become so convinced that something is going to happen that it winds up happening. That's how I'm viewing it, as a self-fulfilling prophecy, even though he's not the one who predicted it.
Yeah. Man, I could sit here and just think about this for the rest of the day. Sorry, I'm like trying to refocus.
I know.
This is definitely like a shower thought type of story. Man, this is one of those stories, like, I had shit to do after this, and I'm not going to be able to do it because I'm just going to, like, sit in this chair right here, just off screen, and just think. These are the types of things you hear about, and you're like, wow, that's weird. But it's like, do you go deeper than that? Like, is it just weird? What a strange coincidence. Because, like you said, like, the whole big key part of that point is, like, yeah, he was very stressed and everyone knew that. So that's a good guess as to how he would die. I don't know. We could be here all day if I continue on this track I'm on. So
it's an interesting one, especially because the like ways that they predicted he would die didn't happen. Like there was no problem with a gas supply. Yeah. Nothing happened because of a dark car.
True.
You know, so parts of it were right, but the crux of it, like the how, was wrong. So when Barker died, he and Fairley believed that not only could they prove that precognition was real, they believed they could find a way to utilize it. But with Barker gone, the research was halted, and with it, any hope of harnessing precognition in the 20th century. When the Bureau was abandoned, it had collected 723 predictions and 18 accurate ones. So the success ratio was not incredibly high. But 12 of those 18 correct predictions came from Kathleen and Alan.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have to say, the Bureau was not successful in preventing any disasters.
Well, what the fuck?
Yeah. They tried, though.
That sucks.
The Bureau is gone, but there are still organizations that continue to research precognition, including the Society for Psychical Research, the one I mentioned earlier, and also the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which I think sounds very cool.
These all sound like schools children get sent to.
Right? Like Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the first one? The Society of what?
The Society for Psychical Research.
Anything with society, I'm immediately like, those are witches.
I'm in.
The society of anything. I'm like, you are a society of mystical creatures, 100%. You're just, whatever this is a cover up for something bigger.
Yeah. I wish I was an intellectual so I could join. Maybe I could fool them or become an intellectual.
Like, this counts as 1 hour of research, I think.
I have many thoughts.
Me too.
Me too. Like all the time.
I think I've been thinking this whole time.
I liked that a lot. Okay. All right, I'm glad we had a little giggle because before I wrap things up, I do want to talk more about
I'm
Aberfan.
sorry. Okay. That was just so like such a vibe shift. All right, I'm glad we got that giggle out of the way. Now it's time to get back to business.
I'm glad we
Okay.
had a brief glimpse
All
of
right.
happiness because I'm going to take the tone back down again.
Yeah, we're going back to the beginning. Okay.
Yeah. It's important to talk about what ultimately happened in Aberfan because it's a story of completely preventable loss. And yeah, it's fucking
Yeah.
important to tell stories like this and keep telling them. So 116 children died, which, like I mentioned earlier, accounted for almost half of the children in Aberfan. So people were hurt and they were very angry. And they directed a lot of that anger to the National Coal Board, the NCB, and its chairman, Lord Robins. And rightfully so, because he acted like a fucking dickhead. When he first heard about what had happened in Aberfan, he didn't rush there to offer help like thousands of others did. No, he delayed his visit to Aberfan by an entire day so that he would have time to be installed as the new chancellor at the University of Surrey.
Okay.
Fuck up number one. Well, not fuck up number
Ew.
one, but thing that I hate that he did after Aberfan number one. Once he actually got off of his ass and went to Aberfan, he announced that this accident had absolutely nothing to do with the National Coal Board. That night, after his team properly fucking briefed him, he returned to the public eye the next day to assert that there was no way anyone could have known this would have happened. Despite 2 decades of complaints, the mini landslide a few years earlier, and the fact that they had placed the spoil tip on top of a fucking underground water source, basically a spring, which made it inherently unstable. This was 100% the NCB's fuck up. Later on, during what would eventually turn into a 5-month inquiry into the situation, Robin was eventually forced to admit that the event was reasonably foreseeable and that the NCB was ultimately at fault. And even then, no one at the NCB was ever prosecuted, fired, or even demoted.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, sadly.
Yeah. And the NCB refused to front the cost for removing the remaining spoil tips from Aberfan.
What? That does surprise me a little bit.
It's bullshit.
What year was this?
Wait till I tell you what happened. So this was 1966 when the Aberfan tragedy occurred.
Okay.
But despite this absolute fucking disgrace in the face of justice, the people of Britain really rallied around Aberfan to support them. And together, the people raised £1,750,000 for an Aberfan disaster fund. But in 1968, the government and the NCB had reached a stalemate in their argument over how they would pay for the spoil tips to be removed because the prime minister had promised that they would be removed. So instead, the government raided the Aberfan Disaster Fund and took £150,000 to pay for the remaining spoil tips to be removed. You want to guess who they paid to do it? The fucking National Coal Board. And that £150,000 that they paid to these fuckers would be worth £3.2 million today, or $4.1 million. So money that was there to help the families heal from a horrendous tragedy that ripped away half of their children was instead given to the fucking assholes who caused it to happen. It's a disgrace. It was awful. In the years that followed, the government did work to improve its legislation around spoil tip management and security. And what happened in Aberfan is ultimately seen as an inciting incident that led to things like better regulations around workplace safety, which is a good thing. But the silver lining here is way too fucking tarnished by the path we need to go on to arrive where we are. And there is, like, I tried so hard to find a way to still end this on a positive note, but it's just not possible. And honestly, I think it would be disrespectful to do that. So I think we kind of have to leave this on a somber note.
Well, and it's because nothing has really changed. Like, you just described the way, like, governing bodies still respond to tragedies. It's still 95% political and 5% just PR. Like, when I say governing bodies, I mean both literal local, regional, state, etc. government, but also corporations and companies and overseeing entities. they still react that way. Like, yeah, maybe policy or procedure may be updated, but personal human response from people in positions like that has not been updated.
Yeah.
Like, there can't be a positive note because there hasn't been enough positive change. We've said in many episodes thus far that hindsight is 2020, and then you hear stories like this and it's like, well, present sight was also 2020. Sometimes people just choose not to see things because they're selfish and don't want to have to front the costs in order to see what they know is actually there. That is a recurring theme that is a problem in this world that remains to be solved.
Yeah. I think if the world had more John Barkers, we would all be in a better place.
That's the positive note I think we need to end on. Not to be insensitive, but like, I do think that that was kind of a happy and interesting part of this story that also didn't end up great, but less about the whole, him being an interesting type of psychologist that I am like personally invested in now and will immediately leave this recording session to go Google a lot about. So if anyone needs any fun facts about him, I'll have them like a half hour from now. But also, it is rare to have a person in a position of power to an extent. I mean, he seemed to be like notable and like well respected, like genuinely want to help in situations like this. Whether or not his help was effective, not saying it wasn't, but at least someone was doing something. Whether or not, people think that that was an effective use of his time, at least he was trying at all, because other people in positions of power certainly were not,
Yeah. He was using his skills and his scientific expertise to try and make a difference. Yeah.
It's weird how scientists do that and then people just ignore them.
Yeah. Isn't that funny?
Just saying. It's interesting. It's just so hilarious.
We're crying.
Hey, we never rated our ice cream.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we need to rate our ice cream. Do you want to go are we doing a scale of 1 to 5?
Yeah, this one I'm confident 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, whatever you want to give me. I loved it. Yes.
I remember like a month ago you were saying I don't know if I'm ever going to give a 5.
Yep, I literally said that last flavor.
5
out of 5, 10, 100 out of 100. Any way you want to swing it. It's 100% from me. Yeah. So
I'm going to the other end of the scale.
No. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. No, that makes sense. You were kind of.
Let me be clear. Yeah. I'm giving what I specifically ate a 1 out of 10. The thing that Gina, chose to put in my body. Nobody made me do this. Which it's an orange popsicle mixed with vanilla ice cream. It doesn't mix well.
You did a good job. Like, yeah. So, okay. The ingredients of the concoction you made, how were those individually? Have
Delightful individually. That's actually what I've been doing is I'll like put the popsicle bits on one side of the bowl and the ice cream bits on the other side of the bowl. And then I just kind of take separate bites. It is good. Like the flavors work well together. The issue is the texture. And I'm a big texture person. And so it was throwing me off.
I know. We're very similar in that way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Maybe in the future, if we get the wrong kind of ice cream, maybe we'll just forgive each other for it. And we don't need to concoct anything. This was thanks for taking one for the team and being the one to test out that. But maybe next time just eat your pineapple popsicle and it'll be okay.
I like that. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're really trying, because we're so like we're new at this and we're trying to be as like true to what we're trying to do as possible, or we're trying not to phone it in right off the bat. So let's just do whatever we can with what we have and do our best.
Just do our best. Do our best.
Without doing too much, We don't need to concoct.
Yeah, it's supposed to be yummy.
So they say. Yeah.
Okay. You think we should call it?
Let's call it.
Let's call it.
Thanks for being here, friends. Keep it cool.
Keep it creepy.